Darnell Cross had long been the kind of man his wife's mother described to her church friends simply as Monique's husband, never by name, always by category, always with that slight pause of a woman who had wanted something different for her daughter and had never quite found a graceful way to hide it. Evelyn Tate had once said it plainly during a family dinner, believing Darnell was still in the kitchen, that Monique had married beneath herself, that a man who spent his 20s in training would spend his 40s catching up, that he would die broke before he ever built anything real. Someone at that table had heard every word. Someone had told him. He had not said a word about it then or since. Monique had been planning her exit for some time before Darnell found the first document. She had transferred $52,000 from accounts he had believed were joint into a structure her attorney had quietly arranged. She had told her mother before she told anyone else. Evelyn had not discouraged her. What neither of them had ever thought to ask, through all those years of Sunday dinners and quiet dismissals, was what Darnell Cross actually did between the start of his day and the end of it. Sometime after the divorce was finalized, Evelyn Tate walked into the lobby of Cross Cardiology Group on Peachtree Road in Atlanta and gave her name to the receptionist. The referral in her hand bore the name of a physician at Emory. The name on the wall behind the front desk bore a different one entirely. She recognized it immediately. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. And subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The light in Darnell's kitchen came in from the east, and he had oriented the breakfast table in that direction specifically when he renovated the house some years earlier. He was up before dawn most mornings, coffee in hand, reviewing patient charts on the tablet while the neighborhood came alive with the sounds of Atlanta waking around him. He was a cardiologist. He thought about hearts for a living, about what sustained them, what compromised them, what quiet failures accumulated over the years until the body could no longer compensate. He had come to believe this was not entirely a medical observation. His grandmother Cora had told him something once, in the last year of her life, when he was deep in his residency, running on little sleep and sitting in her kitchen late at night with nothing left. She had poured him a glass of sweet tea and looked at him steadily. "Baby, a man who knows how the body works knows how everything works. You just have to be patient enough to let things show you." He had not fully understood it then. He understood it now, completely. The house on Cascade Road was a Craftsman 4-bedroom that Darnell had bought before the marriage and renovated with care. There was new foundation reinforcement, a kitchen expansion, and a covered porch he had designed himself with the help of an architect friend. He had done significant framing work with his own hands on the weekends, which Monique had initially found endearing and later found puzzling, as though a physician choosing manual labor was a category error she had never fully resolved. He kept his tools organized in the garage, exactly as his grandfather had taught him, everything in its place, labeled, accessible. On the third shelf of the garage cabinet, inside a fireproof lockbox, was a file Monique had never opened because she had never known it existed. Inside was the operating agreement for Cross Cardiology, the private practice he had established some years earlier with 2 partners. It had grown into a multi-location cardiology network with a dedicated physician staff and an annual revenue that his accountant, Priscilla, had described at their last quarterly review as a strong argument for additional real estate investment. Monique knew he had an office. She did not know he owned the building. He had met her at a Morehouse fundraiser during his fellowship year. She was finishing her MBA, incisive and funny, carrying herself with the self-possession of someone who had never had to perform for approval. He had been drawn to that quality immediately. They married not long after, which her mother Evelyn had announced at the rehearsal dinner was the only thing about the arrangement she approved of. Evelyn was a woman of decided opinions about what her daughter deserved, and those opinions did not include a man still building his career. She had communicated this consistently in the polished, indirect language of someone who had practiced being cutting while maintaining plausible deniability. The comment from that family dinner had reached him through his cousin Tamara, who had been seated at the table and texted him the next morning with the apologetic specificity of someone delivering news she believed he deserved to have. He had read it. He had set his phone down. He had gone to work. Monique came downstairs that morning dressed for the office, already in motion, coffee in one hand and phone in the other. She kissed his cheek without breaking stride and asked if he was at the North Side or Peachtree location. He told her, Peachtree. She nodded and moved to the counter, standing with her back partially turned, typing with the focus the message hardly seemed to require. He noticed the edge of a second phone in her jacket pocket, a different case from the one she always used. He said nothing about it. The signal arrived that afternoon in the form of a letter on the kitchen counter when he returned home. It bore an attorney's letterhead, addressed to Monique, already opened and left face up the way people sometimes leave things they want discovered or have stopped being careful about. He read it once standing in his coat, then set it down, changed clothes, and read it again. It was not yet a filing, only preliminary correspondence referencing the marital estate and a term he recognized from enough colleagues' divorces to understand its implication. Lifestyle analysis. Someone was building a picture of his income. Someone had been building it for some time. He did not react outwardly. The next morning he arrived at the office early, sat at his desk, opened his personal laptop, and began working through what he had and what he needed. He was a cardiologist. He understood that when something had been wrong long enough, there was always a record. The body kept its own documentation, whether you wanted it or not. The joint account statements came first. He pulled those spanning a substantial period and laid them against a legal pad organized by date. What emerged was a pattern of withdrawals, so carefully spaced they were almost elegant, consistent enough to be intentional, varied enough to avoid automatic flagging. Over many months, the total reached $52,000. He confirmed it several times. He photographed every page and sent the files to a secure folder on his personal server. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. The second phone had appeared in Monique's possession some time earlier. He went back through the shared household calendar and mapped every occasion she had cited for evening absences and weekend commitments. A long weekend in Charleston, described as a trip with college friends, several overnight work dinners, a conference in Athens. He cross-referenced these against the withdrawal timestamps and against those evenings when she had been home, but clearly elsewhere in her attention. The pattern spanned a significant stretch of time. A colleague's husband, a man named Cole Bradley, a wealth manager with an office in Buckhead, had been present at several of the social events Darnell and Monique had attended together. Darnell had noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit the load-bearing logic of a structure, not alarming in isolation, but worth noting alongside other observations. He was attentive in ways that felt slightly too calibrated. Monique laughed at his comments a beat too quickly. Darnell had filed the observation away and said nothing. One morning he looked Cole Bradley up and made several phone calls, not to people who knew him socially, but to those who knew his professional standing. From separate sources he learned that Cole's firm had recently lost a significant client portfolio amid a regulatory review, that the firm was restructuring, and that his personal finances were, in one source's words, complicated in ways his clients didn't know about. He was a man who needed something from someone. Darnell wrote it down. He kept it. One evening, coming up the back stairs from the garage, he heard Monique's voice through the partially open study door. Not raised, not arguing, just the clipped efficiency of someone managing a logistics problem. He stood on the landing and listened. He heard his own name once. He heard the word timeline. He heard her say the preliminary work was done and that Evelyn thought the sooner the better. He heard his mother-in-law's name. He stood there a moment longer, then walked back down the stairs, through the kitchen, and out to the covered porch he had designed and built board by board. He sat in the chair for a while as the Atlanta evening settled around him. Then he went inside and called his attorney. "Victoria," he said when she answered, "I need you first thing in the morning. Bring the practice documentation, all of it." Victoria Osei had practiced family law and medical asset protection in Atlanta for many years. She had built her reputation on a specific competency. She was exceptionally good at preventing people from taking things they were not entitled to. She was direct, thorough, and wore an expression during client meetings that suggested she found most attempted financial maneuvering almost refreshingly predictable. She reviewed Darnell's documentation with the brisk efficiency of someone assembling a structure she already understood. "The practice is protected," she said without looking up. "Premarital establishment, separate capitalization maintained throughout, partner agreements intact." Her attorney is going to argue commingling on the basis of household income, and they are going to lose that argument with a well-documented corporate veil. She set down the withdrawal summary. "The $52,000 is the more interesting part. This was structured, deliberately structured." She looked at him. "That changes the character of the proceeding." "What does it change it to?" Darnell asked. "From a divorce," Victoria said evenly, "to something her attorney is going to strongly advise her not to pursue aggressively." She instructed him to gather full tax documentation for several years, the practice operating agreements, and a summary from Priscilla. She told him to continue his normal routine without altering a single habit. He had already been doing exactly that. Some doors you don't open, you document them and wait. His Uncle Chester lived in a split-level indicator and had known Darnell since before he knew himself. He had been at every graduation, every milestone, had sat in the hospital waiting room the night Darnell's mother had surgery and had not left until the news was good. Retired after many years in municipal infrastructure, he carried the particular quiet of a man who had watched a great deal unfold and held very few illusions about human nature. He listened to everything Darnell told him over coffee one morning, then remained still for a long moment. "I was at that family dinner," Chester said finally. "I heard the comment myself. Didn't know if Tamara had said anything." He reached into the drawer beside the kitchen table and turned his phone toward Darnell. It was a text exchange with his daughter from not long before, describing a conversation she had overheard at a gathering at Evelyn's house. Monique and her mother had been in the kitchen. The substance was that the exit was being planned, that Evelyn had connected Monique with the attorney, and that Evelyn expected Darnell would not have sufficient assets to contest anything meaningfully. "She still thinks you're a resident," Chester said. "She built her picture of you years ago and never once updated it." He placed his hand on Darnell's arm for a moment. "Your grandmother used to say that a man who knows how the body works knows how everything works." He looked at his nephew. "She meant you specifically, even when you weren't in the room." Darnell drove home by a longer route than necessary. He needed the time. The forensic financial work completed by Victoria's associate Marcus, a CPA with many years of experience in matrimonial asset tracing in the days that followed, was precise, sourced, and immovable. The $52,000 was mapped thoroughly, each withdrawal cross-referenced against Monique's calendar, her stated locations, and the credit card records Victoria had subpoenaed. The pattern pointed unambiguously to structured concealment. A review of Cole Bradley's financial disclosures, available through the regulatory proceedings his firm had undergone, showed a man whose personal net worth, once liabilities were properly applied, was negative. His professional standing was under active review. He had nothing to offer anyone except the appearance of having something. One evening Darnell prepared his grandmother Cora's jerk chicken from the recipe card she had written out for him in her careful handwriting the year he left for college. He and Monique ate together at the kitchen table he had refinished with his own hands some years earlier. She talked about a work presentation, a friend's birthday, the grocery list. He listened. He answered. He cleared the table. He was a cardiologist. He knew the heart's electrical system operated on precise timing, that the difference between a steady rhythm and an arrhythmia was often invisible until the moment it declared itself. He had learned to wait for that declaration before acting. Preparation was the work. The mediation was scheduled for a morning at the offices of Monique's attorney, a suite on Peachtree Street with the specific aesthetic of a firm that believed its very core should imply it had never lost. Victoria had suggested the venue. Let them be comfortable on their own ground. Let them believe they had arranged the room. Darnell arrived in what he wore on hospital teaching days, dark slacks, a white dress shirt, his ID lanyard still looped through his jacket pocket, as always. He sat across the table from Monique and her attorney, placing Victoria's leather portfolio flat before him. Monique looked composed. Her attorney, Slade, carried the practiced ease of a man who had already written the morning's narrative in his mind. Slade opened with a lifestyle analysis. He painted a picture of shared income, a shared household, a medical practice whose earnings had sustained the marital standard of living. He used the word commingling several times. He was thorough. He was also working from a financial snapshot that contained not a single document from Victoria's filing. Victoria let him finish. Then she opened the portfolio. She placed the Cross Cardiology Group operating agreement on the table, founded some years before the marriage. Partner equity unaltered by any marital transaction. Corporate accounts cleanly separated throughout. She laid it down with the calm of someone placing a card they had been holding for exactly the right moment. Then came the tax summaries, followed by the practice real estate documentation. Multiple clinical locations, several owned outright by the practice LLC. One held in a trust established in Darnell's name prior to the marriage. Slade's composure did not collapse. It simply became effortful. Then Victoria placed the withdrawal summary, many pages, meticulously annotated $52,000 across many months, structured, documented, and cross-referenced against location data and the calendar Monique had maintained on the household tablet. Several entries placed her in proximity to Cole Bradley's Buck head office on dates that aligned precisely with the withdrawal activity. Monique went very still. Victoria spoke for several more minutes. She described exactly what a contested filing would look like. She used the word structured twice, with the specific legal weight it carried in such proceedings. She spoke without drama or elevation, the way one reports a lab result factually, completely, without embellishment. Slade asked for a short recess. When they returned, Monique looked at Darnell with an expression that was neither quite apology nor quite anger. It was the look of someone who had understood too late that she had misread every variable in a situation she believed she had fully controlled. She started to speak. "I know what you're going to say," Darnell said quietly. He had not raised his voice once in that room, nor in all the months before. "I want you to understand that I am not here because I am angry. I'm here because I built something, and I intend to leave this room with what I built." Monique said it had not been meant to go this way. She said things had become complicated. She said his name the way a person says something they had been holding for a long time, and it sounded different now, heavier, and too late. Slade placed a hand on the table. I believe we can reach a fair resolution this morning. Victoria looked at him. I think so too. You'll find the terms in Section 4 already quite fair. Darnell looked at Monique for one long, unhurried moment, the look of a man who had examined the full anatomy of a thing and arrived on the other side intact. I examined a great many hearts before I understood what makes them fail, he said. It's almost never the dramatic event. It's what you allow to go unaddressed for years. He picked up his jacket. Take care of yourself, Monique. He walked out of the suite, down the elevator, and out onto Peachtree Street into a morning that was cold, clear, and entirely his own. Time passed like clean. Water over stone. The receptionist at the Peachtree Road location called back to the physician's suite 1 morning to let Darnell know that a referral walk-in had been seated in the lobby. The name on the Emory referral was Evelyn Tate. The referring physician's note mentioned a recent abnormal EKG and a strong family history of cardiac events. It was standard routing to the nearest network cardiologist. He stood at the door of his office for a moment. Sylvia, his front desk manager, a precise woman who ran the lobby with the efficiency of a flight controller, had told him the patient had walked in, given her name, and gone very still upon reading the name on the wall behind the reception desk. He walked to the lobby. Evelyn Tate sat by the window in her coat, a woman in her later years who carried Monique's posture and a careful arrangement of composure that was working harder than usual. She looked up when he came through the door. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Mrs. Tate, Darnell said in the same register he used with every patient, direct, unhurried, without agenda. Let's get you taken care of. He reviewed the EKG with the full attention he gave every patient, ordered the appropriate follow-up studies, and explained everything in the plain language he had learned from his grandmother, not simpler than the facts required, but exactly as clear as the person before him needed. He was thorough. He was professional. He was, as he had always been, precise. When it was finished and she stood in the doorway of the exam room with her coat buttoned, Evelyn looked at him with an expression that held more layers than he intended to examine. You're good at this, she said. I know, he said. And then, because he was not a man who carried things he had already set down, you'll want to schedule your follow-up with Dr. Anand. He's the best I have for the monitoring you need. Sylvia will get you set up at the front. He handed her the referral slip and walked back down the hallway to his office. Cross Cardiology had added another location not long before. The hospital affiliation agreement with Piedmont had been signed recently as well. Priscilla had used the word acceleration at their last quarterly meeting, a word she did not use lightly. He had endowed a scholarship at Morehouse for pre-med students from the West Side neighborhoods, in his grandmother Cora's name, because it felt right and because she deserved the recognition she had never received in the rooms where it should have been given. One morning over coffee in the garden of the Cascade Road house, Jade asked him what his grandmother had been like. He took a moment, then told her all of it: the sweet tea at midnight, the steadiness, the sentence about knowing how the body worked. Jade, a reconstructive surgeon with a midtown practice whose patients were those rebuilding from damage, listened to every word without hurrying him. She was not performing warmth. She was simply warm. He had come to understand, in the time since the mediation, that this was the most important difference there was. He sat on the covered porch that evening as the last light faded from the garden he had planted along the fence line, the leaves stirring in the small wind. The Japanese maple in the far corner was deep in its autumn colors, the leaves turning the shade of old copper. The tomatoes had been extraordinary that year, splitting at the seams with their own weight. He had built everything worth keeping. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothed. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.